One, we are live. Thank you.
Hello, Black Health Matters family. Are you enjoying your day? So let me tell you, we have some active folks in the exhibit hall. And I want to share some of our top people in terms of the leaderboard, meaning that they're listening to sessions, they're in the chats, they're talking with our sponsors. Starting with position number 5, we have Cheryl Lee Owens. We also have a position number 4, Oranetta Hall. Position 3, Lisa Gomes. Position number 2, Verna Lemon. And position number 1 is Sharon Barbour. These people are just interacting with the format, with the platform. It's wonderful. So keep it up. Also, I'd like to make sure that you all do spend time in the exhibit booths, talking with Myovant, talking with the folks from Retrophin. We have also Omega Sci-Fi is present. So we have a lot of great organizations that have shown up to interact with you today. So please spend great quality time with them. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about something that has been incredibly controversial, which is the coronavirus and vaccines. This is just a hotbed. I think if you go and you have a family dinner and you talk about whether or not you want to participate in a clinical trial or whether or not you're going to take the vaccine, you'll find a lot of different opinions, and everyone passionate about what they believe. What do we believe? It was so important for us to have this session today with an expert that is going to be completely agnostic. She's not going to advocate for one more than the other, but more to inform us and educate us so that we can make an intelligent decision when it comes to the vaccine, whenever it becomes available and by whomever company puts it into the marketplace. So I have the pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett. Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett is a research fellow and the scientific lead for the coronavirus vaccines and immunopathogens team at the National Institutes of Health, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, Vaccine Research Center. She received a BS in Biological Sciences with a secondary major in sociology in 2008 from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where she was a Meyerhoff Scholar and an NIH undergraduate scholar. She then enrolled at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she obtained her PhD in microbiology and immunology in 2014. A viral immunologist by training, Dr. Corbett uses her expertise to propel novel vaccine development for pandemic preparedness. I also want to ask her, does she know Dr. Fauci? Has she met Dr. Fauci? So she's prepared this excellent presentation for us, which will include a video. Please chat with her. You all can put your questions into the question box at the bottom of your screen. She's interested in answering everything. And now I have the pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Corbett.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for the invitation to speak to you guys today. I am so excited to be here to talk to you all about the vaccine development process for COVID-19 and to lend my expertise to my family. Essentially, this is how I feel when I speak to the community in this way. And so as aforementioned, I'm a viral immunologist. I work at the National Institutes of Health. I am actually an employee of Dr. Fauci's. So yes, I have met Dr. Fauci and meet Dr. Fauci quite a bit, but I work in the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease and a center called the Vaccine Research Center, which is a center that was actually founded under the Clinton administration around this idea that the US government needed to take some standing in vaccine development from a scientific perspective to really move vaccine development in a direction that was for the people. And that was in the HIV, in the early days of the HIV pandemic. And so here we are in a COVID-19 pandemic, which is something that from the umbrella which I sit, so I'm the scientific lead for the coronavirus team. But coronavirus is just one of many viruses that had potential to cause this type of health devastation across the globe. And so one of the things I wanted to get out of this conversation, first of all, is that I want you guys to be reminded that it is a conversation. I'm here not to teach, but also to really answer questions around the vaccine development process. But I wanted you guys to understand that the vaccine development process for COVID-19 and vaccine development in general is just that. It is a process. It is a process that has some level of structural organization and vetting. And the vaccines that come out of the end of that process are deemed safe by the Food Drug Administration. And there are tons of levels of vetting and implanted research in that system to ensure that the general public is safe when receiving vaccines. So as far as coronavirus vaccine development is concerned, if you've seen me on TV before, then it's clear that I am one of the inventors on a patent that is being used for several companies in this entire process. And for me, what is extremely stark about this pandemic is that I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but that COVID-19 is so plagued with inequalities across the healthcare system. And all of the numbers that we see that are bubbling out of our communities as Black people and also in other minority communities, such as the Latino community, really highlight that health inequalities is something that is going to be continuous if we don't fix the problem at the root. So what is the root of the problem? Obviously, there are social and structural determinants of health inequalities. We as a people are extremely overrepresented in essential services and industries that allow us to be constantly exposed to this virus. And in those types of jobs, they often don't provide the type of health care that one might need or paid sick leave, et cetera. Culturally, we are more likely to live in multi-generational families, and so, or in buildings where, we are residentially segregated, but essentially piled on top of each other. So there is multiple reasons why these health inequalities continue to come about. It was something that happened in the HIV pandemic, and it's happening again today in the coronavirus pandemic. Notwithstanding, obviously, there is a level of stress that comes from essentially just being Black that really manifests itself as in our health outcomes, high blood pressure, diabetes, and all of these things that that are caused essentially by stress at the end of the day and the types of trauma that we endure on a day-to-day basis. So it goes without saying that as this coronavirus pandemic continues to ripple across the world, right? We are at the point where we're over 200,000 deaths in the United States of America, which is, it's a terrible predicament to be in. And we just started what is considered to be the third wave of this pandemic. And my boss and I, we wrote this perspective that basically said that there has to be 60 or 70% of population immunity before we can resume what are normal activities and safely resume what are normal activities. And while there are obvious public health measures that one can take to prevent themselves from getting infected with coronavirus, wearing a mask, social distancing, etc., it's obvious that those things have not been enforced in a way that has really been able to control this pandemic, particularly in this country. We hear a lot about this thing called herd immunity. People are like, well, if enough people get infected, then we'll have population-based immunity, and then we'll be able to prevent coronavirus from spreading on and on. But what we don't understand is that on a very micro scale, on the big level, if we allow for even 1% of the population to be infected with this virus to achieve what is herd immunity, more than 40 million people will succumb to this virus globally. And from our perspective, as the curators of essentially prevention of disease, as vaccine developers, as viral immunologists, that is completely unacceptable. And that's why vaccine development for pandemic preparedness has been my mission over the last 6 years with my team, but really understanding that only a vaccine at this point can change the dynamic of this pandemic. So you probably hear about vaccines on TV every other day. And this coronavirus vaccine development process is unprecedented in the speed of which these vaccines are happening. And, without a doubt, the speed of which these vaccines are being developed causes some level of hesitancy, particularly because from the outside looking in, no one really has an idea of what is happening on a day-to-day basis that is causing these vaccines to be developed so quickly. So actually this graphic is a little outdated because now Johnson & Johnson also started their phase 3 clinical trial, but goes without saying that multiple companies are in what is considered to be a race for vaccine development. But at the end of the day, no matter which of these vaccines moves into licensure and gets approved, the vaccine will be proven to be safe because there are multiple checkpoints along the way in this trajectory towards being approved for general use in the public. And I have a video here that really outlines how the vaccine development process works. And then I'm going to give you more of a micro scale on how it happened in my particular team at the NIH.
Vaccine development can generally be split into 3 phases. In exploratory research, scientists experiment with different approaches to find safe and replicable vaccine designs. Once these are vetted in the lab, they enter clinical testing, where vaccines are evaluated for safety, efficacy, and side effects across a variety of populations. Finally, there's manufacturing, where vaccines are produced and distributed for public use. Under regular circumstances, this process takes an average of 15 to 20 years. But during a pandemic, researchers employ numerous strategies to move through each stage as quickly as possible. Exploratory research is perhaps the most flexible. The goal of this stage is to find a safe way to introduce our immune system to the virus or bacteria. This gives our body the information it needs to create antibodies capable of fighting a real infection. So the best way to speed things up is for many labs to work on different models simultaneously. This race to the finish strategy produced the first testable Zika vaccine in 7 months, and the first testable COVID-19 vaccine in just 42 days. Being testable doesn't mean these vaccines will be successful, but models that are deemed safe and easily replicable can move into clinical testing, while other labs continue exploring alternatives. Whether a testable vaccine is produced in 4 months or 4 years, the next stage is often the longest and most unpredictable stage of development. Clinical testing consists of 3 phases, each containing multiple trials. After a successful phase 3 trial, a national regulatory authority reviews the results and approves safe vaccines for manufacturing. Every vaccine has a unique blend of biological and chemical components that require a specialized pipeline to produce. To start production as soon as the vaccine is approved, manufacturing plans must be designed in parallel to research and testing. This requires constant coordination between labs and manufacturers, as well as the resources to adapt to sudden changes in vaccine design. Our best strategy is for labs around the world to cooperate and work in parallel on different approaches. By sharing knowledge and resources, scientists can divide and conquer any pathogen. Vaccine development can generally be...
So like that video said, there are multiple stages of this vaccine development process. And I know when you hear and you see the memes and you see people on TV touting that this is the fastest vaccine development in history, sometimes that can be scary. And if I wasn't living inside of this bubble of understanding how the trajectory towards this moment in history happened, I would also be scared. But I want people to understand that there are levels to each of these different processes. And while in normal times, when we are outside of a pandemic, or when we don't have the types of technologies that we've accrued over the years, vaccine development has taken 10 or 15 years even. But one of the things that's really, I think, important to note here, and the glory of the science and the beauty of the science behind these particular vaccine platforms, is that this preclinical testing, all of the work that scientists have been doing for years and years and years around coronavirus vaccine development, from our side at the NIH and other academic laboratories, but then also companies who have generated their own individual platforms for making the vaccines work, have been working on their side as well. And when you kind of come together with this amount of knowledge and make these collaborations work, for example, we collaborate most closely with Moderna. The patents technology that we made is being used by 4 out of the 5 leading companies in phase 3 trial right now. And when we take that level of collaboration and apply it to the process, we're able to shorten the process so significantly. And as we learn more at each of these phases of testing, we're able to apply, for example, our phase 1 results to give them to the FDA and ask for permission to start a phase 2 while the phase 1 might be still happening. But what's important to note is that none of these processes are cut short. What's happening is that there is really concerted effort to make sure that we get a vaccine into general population so that we can return to essentially what would be normal life and start to save some lives. So how do we do it? I get this question a lot because sitting on this side of history, obviously it is a blessing to have had the first vaccine go into phase 1 clinical trial in 66 days after the virus was actually known to be the particular coronavirus. That is the fastest ever. But really, you know, the timeline that people see starts on January the 1st of this year, and the timeline that we see really started years and years ago, even in the time of MERS, which is another coronavirus, when that started to circulate in the Middle East. It became very clear to us that, oh my God, one day one of these coronaviruses could cause a pandemic. We need to start working now. And that entire umbrella of vaccines development is called pandemic preparedness. And so what did my team do? We researched MERS coronavirus to some extent in preclinical models, understanding how to make a vaccine. We started to collaborate with pharmaceutical companies extremely early, and other laboratories as well that understand different approaches to vaccine development. And so then we came together as a team on December the 31st when this outbreak was announced, and when we suspected that it might be a coronavirus, and said, if this is a coronavirus, we have enough knowledge in our knowledge bank, published patents, published papers, and we will be able to provide the world with a very good vaccine at what is called at risk. And so when we say at risk, what that means is not, oh, it's risky to get the vaccine. What that says is that taking away the entire, 2 or 3 years of what would be previously with starting from scratch, we'd already done that. So we can just pull the trigger on preclinical testing in animal models and then moving very quickly into a phase 1 clinical trial, which is what we did. So what did we know? And I'm not going to get really deep into this, but I want people to understand a couple of things about the vaccines that are currently in phase 3 clinical trial right now in the United States of America, is that you're not getting an infection when you get these vaccines. What we know is that you can literally take just the top of the virus, just one particular protein off the virus, and give it to someone to cause that person to be immune to the whole virus. You don't need to give a dead virus. You can, but you don't need to. We have so much new technology and understanding about these little small proteins that we're able to utilize them in a very safe way to essentially trick the immune system to think that it's seen the entire virus before. And the protein in the case of the coronavirus is called the spike protein. And it does this thing where it locks with the cell and then causes the virus to spit its genetic material into the cell. And then all of these things happen, your cells are infected and you get sick from coronavirus. So how do we prevent that? We basically say, let's tell the body how to see that spike protein. And by telling the body how to see that spike protein, the body makes these proteins, these other proteins called antibodies. And you generate enough antibodies in your system based on vaccines, then you will be able to stop the virus spike protein from binding to the cell and then prevent infection. And so it's a really simplistic model for preventing disease. And there are other things that, you will hear about, can you take vitamin C? Can you do all of these things to prevent infection? But what is extremely important to understand is that while all of the healthy things that people do, eating well, I know you're getting a cooking demonstration after this, all of these things that you do keep your immune system healthy, but nothing other than a vaccine can tell your immune system to recognize a particular virus and prevent that virus from getting into a cell. And so we studied that spike protein for so much time that we had enough information to lead us into this rapid vaccine development. But now we sit in this problem, right, where we have multiple vaccines in phase 3 clinical trials, 30,000, 40,000 people in each of these phase 3 clinical trials. The FDA has very strict guidelines on how the vaccines that come out of these phase 3s can get licensed and what type of data must come out of those trials. But then we have a population of people in America that are essentially extremely hesitant about getting the vaccine at the end of the day. And although this graphic doesn't necessarily break it down by racial and ethnic group, particularly in the Black community, we have some very embedded hesitancies around vaccines. And I felt that us understanding where the history of the vaccine came from, me putting a face to the vaccine technology and the team that has really kind of propelled many of the companies into this, what is considered to be rapid development, I wanted us to kind of understand that there is a system in place that is testing and vetting and ensuring the safety of the vaccine that comes out of the clinical trials. And so although you hear, Operation Warp Speed, you hear all of these things, we're not taking any shortcuts. If anything, we're basically combining, 5-10 years worth of work into a year, losing a lot of sleep doing so. But because there is such a need for prevention of this virus in our population, particularly in minority communities, and the vaccine that comes out of these processes will be deemed safe, and also not just safe, but the bar for efficacy for this vaccine is a bar that the FDA has set to say you can't even license it if it's not protecting people to a certain extent in your phase 3 clinical trial. And then one of the things that also makes our community very hesitant is that oftentimes we hear, and I've seen, the blog posts and the memes, et cetera, that people who don't look like us are telling us that we need to be the first people to get the vaccine, right? And that is obviously going to cause some hesitancy because of the history behind the medical institutions and experimental medicine, you taking advantage of Black people. But understanding that what they are trying to say, even though not translated appropriately sometimes, is that because there will be a shortage of coronavirus vaccines, even if every single company that is currently developing a technology comes together, there will still be a shortage, at least initially, of coronavirus vaccines. And so really strategically saying the people that are most at risk, healthcare workers, other essential workers, et cetera, teachers, for example, who constantly being exposed all the time, or those people who generally are in populations that have comorbidities, et cetera, saying that, okay, should we deploy the vaccine to those types of populations first is really a fair and also a fair economic and also epidemiological important thing to really try to understand. Otherwise, I mean, like most things that in this country, especially medicinal things that come out in this country, they will be expensive and inaccessible to the people who need them the most. And on that note, I will end there and take some questions from you all as well. So I think someone is asking, how can we be sure if we see pressure from leadership and professionals, fear of being fired? I'm not really necessarily sure if I completely understand that question, but you know, one of the things that I have gotten a lot, being Black and also I'm obviously a federal employee, is that someone put me here as the face of the vaccine to make sure that African Americans are taking something that might not be safe. And that's just completely untrue. I mean, the history is in itself. The patents that we authored, I think were authored in like 2016, 2017, even before this pandemic. I've been a scientist essentially since I was 16 years old and doing extremely revolutionary work beyond coronaviruses. So I have influenza vaccine platforms patented. The team that we've worked under or worked with has really been grueling out a lot of very basic scientific work that's published far and wide. And, you know, the way that I look at it is that someone else could be taking credit. But I chose to be the face of what is my intellectual property, because it is important for people, not just from this side, to understand how vaccines work, et cetera, but also for like young Black people to understand that being a scientist is something that is attainable and possible. So let's see, I can answer probably two more. So this question is, the government appears to be placing significant pressures on the NIH and FDA to advance vaccine development, and how will we maintain a focus on the science and assure that the community is provided a safe and effective option? This is a great question. So, right. So there are pressures from multiple directions around this vaccine development. And I think that the regulatory agency, the FDA, is doing an amazing job in ensuring that those pressures do not change the way that they view how this vaccine should be deemed safe and efficacious at the end of the day. So there's actually, their standard for emergency use authorization is one of the most stringent, statistically, one of the most stringent standards that we've ever seen for emergency use authorization. So if any vaccine gets that type of authorization, understand that the statistics that pushed it in that direction are extremely robust. Also, you know, certain things like following the people for 2 months after their second vaccination, after they've been in the trial, understanding that the number, like you have to have had 15,000 people out of a 30,000 people trial vaccinated before you can receive emergency use authorization. Also understanding that every single piece of data that we generate, not just in humans, but even in animals. I tell my team all the time, right? Like the FDA can come and pick apart our animal data, and we've submitted all of those things to the FDA as well. So safety signals all the way from everything from a mouse to a human are completely vetted throughout this entire process. I think that, you know, for multiple directions of this pandemic, whether it be even the public health measures, wearing a mask, social distancing, there's political pressures in multiple directions. But from our standpoint, where we sit at the NIH and also, you know, with the FDA, the standpoint is that the safety of people is most important. And so, so far, no one has really doubled down on what are the criteria for deeming a vaccine safe and efficacious. So someone asks, do we know when the vaccine will or is likely to come out? We don't. You know, I've been on CNN and like all these other places, and I try to remind people that the data really tells us when the vaccines come out. When this pandemic began, we sat down and we made a goal. Our goal was, we need to make sure that we have this thing into general population by next spring, giving ourselves 18 months, a year and a half to make the entire process through phase 3 and through to licensure, if it shall work, right? So right now we're in phase 3 clinical trial. Almost 30,000 people enrolled in ours, particularly, and the other companies are, you know, right there with us, similar enrollment. And we think that that target will be hit. We, you know, most people are saying that there will probably be some level of understanding about how well these vaccines work, even by November. And so soon. And even though we're living in this time where things are stressful, we're away from our families and all of these things, you know, working in different conditions, et cetera, understanding that this is as fast as we can go with what we have, and the fastest in history that anyone has ever gone, allowing some grace in that way. And I think my time is actually up, so I can't answer any more questions, but my handle on all social media is Kizzy, PhD. And if you want more information from us, you can ask me directly in my messages on social media, or you can visit covidpreventionnetwork.gov. And thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to spend my Saturday morning in this way. And I am thankful to be put in this position to use my knowledge to respond in this way and to communicate with people in this way. And so don't ever hesitate to ask me anything, even if my answers sometimes come slow. So Kizzy, PhD. Bye.